Hello and welcome. I am Rajiv Gupta, a certified trainer and a senior technician at PCMacPlus.com. I'm going to review the part 1 of form factors, a subsection of A Plus certification domain 1, hardware, section 1.2, motherboard, power supplies, and computer cases, their components, types, and several features. Let's discuss the motherboard form factors now. As you can see in this slide, we have three different components: a power supply, a motherboard, and the computer cases. Motherboards, power supplies, and computer cases are often sold together and must be compatible with each other. We begin by looking at these three components as an interconnecting system. When you put together a new system or replace components in an existing system, the motherboard, power supplies, and the case must all be compatible. The standard that describe the size, shape, and major features of these components so that they work together are called form factors. When you are deciding which form factor to use, the motherboard drives the decision because it determines what the system can do. After you have decided to use a certain form factor for the motherboard, you must use the same form factor for the case and power supply. Using a matching form factor for the motherboard, power supply, and case assures you that the motherboard fits in the case. It also assures you the power supply cords to the motherboard provide the correct voltage and the connectors match the connections on the board. Another thing that it assures you is the holes in the motherboard align with the holes in the case for anchoring the board to the case. Holes in the case align with the ports coming off the motherboard as well. For some form factors, wires for switches and lights on the front of the case match up with connections on the motherboard. Also, the holes in the power supply align with the holes in the case for anchoring the power supply to the case. Here we are looking at a form factor for motherboard. The first popular PC motherboard was, of course, the original IBM PC released in August 1981. IBM followed the PC with the XT motherboard in March 1983, which had the same size and shape as the PC board but had 8 slots instead of 5. Both the IBM PC and XT motherboards were 9-inch by 13-inch in size. Also, the slots were shaped 0.8 inches apart in the XT instead of 1 inch apart in the PC. The AT form factor is the oldest and the biggest form factor. It was popular until the baby AT was released, which was around the time of 386 processor, because it was 1992 to 1993. The reason that prompted the baby AT was the width of AT, 12 inches, and the fact that the board was difficult to install, service, and upgrade. The baby AT was the standard in PC industry from roughly 1993 to 1997. Some issues with the AT and baby AT design were the location of the features on the board. The CPU socket was placed in the front so that it may not interfere with longer bus cards. In some designs, the memory sockets were similarly placed. This limited the amount and selection of peripheral cards you could have installed. Also, the I/O ports were separated and mounted on the case and connected to pinouts on the motherboard. These were usually located near the floppy and IDE pinouts and resulted in quite a jumble of ribbon cables. The full-size AT motherboard form factor that you see here matched the original IBM AT motherboard design. This allowed for a very large board of up to 12 inches wide by 13.8 inches deep. The full-size AT board first debuted in August 1984 when IBM introduced the personal computer AT Advanced Technology. To accommodate the 16-bit 286 processor and all the necessary support components at the time, IBM needed more room than the original PC XT size boards could provide. So for the AT, IBM increased the size of the motherboard but retained the same screw hole and connector position of the XT design. To accomplish this, IBM essentially started with the PC XT size board and extended it in two directions. The keyboard connector and slot connectors in the full-size AT boards still conform to the same specific placement requirements to fit the holes in the XT cases already in use, but a larger case was still required to fit the larger board. Because of the larger size of the board, a full-size AT motherboard only fits into full-size AT desktop or tower cases. Because these motherboards did not fit well into the smaller baby AT or mini tower cases, and because of advances in component miniaturization, they were no longer being produced by most motherboard manufacturers, except in some cases for dual processor server applications. ATX. ATX is Advanced Technologist Extended. That was a motherboard form factor specification developed by Intel in 1995 to improve on previous de facto standards like the AT form factor. It was the first big change in computer case, motherboard, and power supply design in many years, improving standardization and interchangeability of parts. The specification defined the key mechanical dimensions, mounting point, I/O panel, power and connector interfaces between a computer case, a motherboard, and a power supply. With the improvements it offered, including lower cost, ATX overtook AT completely as the default form factor for new system within few years. ATX motherboard measured up to 12 inches by 9.6 inches. The CPU and memory slot sat beside expansion slot so that full-length expansion cards don't bump into the CPU or memory modules. The original ATX form factor had case fans blowing air into the case, but early revisions to the form factor had fans blowing air out of the case. Blowing air out of the case does a better job of keeping the system cool. ATX improved on the Baby AT and the LPX form factors in several major areas, including it had a built-in double high external I/O connector panel, single main keyed internal power supply connector, relocated the CPU and the memory locations, relocated the I/O connectors, improved the cooling, and it was lower in the cost. The micro ATX form factor was a major variation of ATX and addressed some technologies that had emerged since the original development of ATX. Micro ATX reduced the total cost of a system by reducing the number of expansion slots on the motherboard, reducing the power supply to the board, and allowing for a smaller case size. A variation of the micro ATX is the mini ATX. This form factor is smaller than micro ATX and designed for small systems such as a home theater system. Micro ATX is a motherboard factor Intel originally introduced in December 1997 as an evolution of the ATX form factor for smaller and lower cost systems. Then came the BTX. The BTX form factor motherboards are incompatible with most of the ATM form factor cases and vice versa. In particular, BTX motherboards are flipped compared to ATX and mount on the opposite side of the case. BTX motherboard dominated over the conventional ATX boards in 2005. There were three reasons for making the change from the ATX form factor to BTX: general cooling deficiencies, the noise generated by cooling, the more sensible layouts of components to enable smaller systems. Some of the changes that were not obvious were in the electrical connections. The 24-pin connector is the same as ATX 12-volt connector that is typically used for workstations, except that it is based on CFX 12-volt specification. It is different from ATX, and there are 4 additional connections for 3.3, 5, and 12 volt, including the ground wire. The BTX motherboards are designed to be available in 4 different sizes: BTX, similar to full-size ATX, Micro BTX, and finally the Nano BTX and Pico BTX for small form factor computers. The difference between the last two is the Nano BTX offers 2 expansion card slots versus 1 for Pico BTX. NLX is another form factor, which is a low-profile motherboard form factor designed to improve upon today's low-profile form factors and to adapt to new market trends and PC technologies. NLX supports current and future processor technologies, new accelerated AGP high-performance graphic solutions, supports tall memory technology. It provides more level design integration flexibility. LPX form factor is based on a design by Western Digital. LPX is an older form factor, which is 8.67 inches by 9.25 inches, that has been replaced by NLX. The LPX form factor is usually found in desktop model PCs. This completes the part 1 of form factors. Don't forget to watch the part 2. Please recommend PC Mac Plus on YouTube to your colleagues and friends. Thank you.